Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show veteran flight paramedic and co-founder of the Incomologists, John East. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into EMS, emergency medicine in the rural setting, his transition into flight medicine, mastering the basics, medical innovation, the importance of life insurance, entrepreneurship, his own experience with the 24/72 work week, healthy transition, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you John East. Enjoy. Well, John, I want to start by saying thank you for taking the time and driving over to the studio, aka my house. So for people listening, if you were at your home, where would we find you right now?
I'm so glad I got to hear that. I was worried doing this podcast with you in your home. I wasn't going to get the question, where on planet Earth are we finding you today? So if I wasn't here, I'd be home with my wife, Leanne, and our two dogs, Darlin and Trixie, in Inverness, Florida.
Beautiful. Well, I want to start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Sure. So I grew up on the mean streets of Homestead, Florida. It's a small town just south of Miami. It's actually not such a small town anymore, but I grew up in the Florida Everglades, in the wilderness, off the beaten path. Childhood was fantastic. It was an adventure. It was all outdoors, and for a reason. But looking back, before coming on to visiting with you today and having this talk, I tried to kind of compartmentalize like seasons of life and like really analyze them. And, it was interesting exploring childhood because it was very much a dichotomy of awesome and awful, like all wrapped up into one. And, happy to explore that, if you like or not. But mom was a nurse, career nurse, 40 plus years, doing bedside nursing, hardest working person I've ever known. Dad was an on again, off again firefighter, and also boat mechanic growing up.
When I hear Homestead, I think of Johnny Mack, who was one of the top guys in CrossFit, certainly used to be. And he had an interesting story because he was a lineman early on. And responded to, I think he lived in Homestead as well. I forgot that right, when Hurricane Andrew came through. Do you remember that? And talk to me about that experience, because that pretty much devastated the entire city of Homestead, if my memory serves me right.
Sure. So, if Johnny Mack's from Homestead, he would be the second best athlete to ever come out of Homestead behind only me, which is nothing for him.
I did see your clean today on social media, so there we go. I can attest to that.
That was a nice clean. First one since shoulder surgery. I'm pretty proud of it. But yes, I was in Homestead for Hurricane Andrew. It was, it's interesting as an adult now that owns a home and has responsibilities. I understand just how awful that was for my parents, how stressful that was for so many families down there. I was 5 or 6. I was 5 when Hurricane Andrew came through. The night of was terrifying. Our home came apart with us in it. We had to move from room to room as the roof kind of got torn off in stages. But we survived, had a few of the neighbors whose houses were completely destroyed, migrated to our house through the night. So that was terrible. It was terrifying. Still remember it vividly. Even as a 5-year-old, there's like images and sounds that you kind of hang on to. But after the fact, as an adventurous 5-year-old, it was pretty incredible. We lived in a camper trailer in our driveway for like a year. The Army was coming around every day. There was Humvees and Chinook helicopters and soldiers giving out Oreos and bowls of soup and sandwiches. So, as a kid, it was a lot of fun, but as awful as that sounds, but as an adult now looking back and kind of unpacking all of it, I mean, it was devastation. That town, I moved out of Homestead when I was 18. Hurricane Andrew came in when I was 5. And when I moved away from home, that place still had not recovered fully from it.
Mr. Rogers talked about, find the helpers in a situation. What do you remember as a small kid? And then what were some of the stories that you heard years after that, being a Homestead resident?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a great quote. I love that quote, and I do think of it often. But it really did. I mean, so this may be an interesting intertwining of topics here, but my dad, growing up, was a really gruff dude, not really like overly friendly guy. He was kind of a mean guy. But I mean, that night there was like no question, right? We heard neighbors shouting for help. He went through the door open and, called them over. They came to the home, and from that point forward, it pretty much, I guess we had a much more collaborative relationship with all of our neighbors, and everybody truly did pitch in to help each other out. I've seen that in much less acute, things that have happened through the years, even as an adult. And it really is, I don't know what the word for it is, but, I don't know if it's validating or affirming, when you see people that would otherwise just not let each other, not let each other in traffic, but something bad happens, you see the good come out of people.
I think this is the message that we should be hearing, and I hope that the through line of this whole podcast has been, community and kindness and compassion and service. And there was that, jargon thrown around, make America great again. It's like, yeah, you can, absolutely. And it's already there. It's just nurturing that. And we see it. Everyone says, I miss 9/12, for example. You look at, I'd say Katrina wasn't the best of examples because there was good and bad highlighted, but so many of these, natural disasters, when you hear stories from boots on the ground, that's what you hear, neighbors being neighborly, and the religion and the skin color and the people that they sleep with is irrelevant. They're just Americans. And I feel like we've had that kind of hijacked from us.
Yeah, I agree. This kind of calls me back to a recent podcast you did with Rob Jones, when you two discussed being a citizen versus a civilian. That one spoke to me, and I rewound that and listened to it a few times. But that's ultimately what you guys are speaking to there, right? Find a way to contribute and be a citizen in your community. This is also another thing, but this is number 115 of about 3,000 things I've learned from my wife, Leanne. But she showed me how to truly be a supportive, contributing friend, family member, and just, I guess, community member. And the first time I really saw this was when we had somebody close to us lose a family member. And, for the longest time, I had always, reached out like, hey, I'm so sorry to hear that. If you need anything, let me know. Right. Happy to help. She was the first one I ever saw when we had someone close to us lose a family member. She shot me a text to let me know and said, I'm going to start making a meal. Can you take it over? Like, didn't ask what they needed. She's like, take it over there and then find a way to help while you're there. Find something to do. There's something you can do to help. So, yeah. And I do think that's in keeping with the spirit of your show, for sure. Having listened to a bunch of your episodes.
Yeah, Rob was amazing. That's the second time he's been on the show. We climbed the One World Trade together. We climbed. I wasn't allowed to use my fire gear, so I kind of got to be in just gym shorts and 2 working legs, and he bear crawled 100+ floors all the way up to the top. So you talk about humility. It's a humbling experience. You mentioned before the comment, some of your childhood was awesome, some was awful. If you want to expand on that.
Sure. Yeah. So for the longest, when I graduated high school, I couldn't get out of Homestead fast enough, for a number of reasons. One, in high school, when I started nearing the end of my time in high school, I really started looking around, and, for as long as I could remember, my track in life was I was going to graduate high school and be a fishing guide. and it was going to be great. And I was going to do what I love fishing, get paid to do it. And, at a point, I don't think with any like concerted thought or effort, just kind of organically looked around, looked at the landscape around me, and, the aspirational place to land for someone in Homestead back then was a job with the county, doing whatever, animal control, whatever it was. A job with the county has benefits, or, working at the cement plant. And I realized I was like, that's not for me. I want something more. I don't know what it is, but for that reason alone, I'm out. But also, growing up, like I said, if you asked me to, paint my childhood with a broad stroke, and wrap it up in one thought, it was awesome and it was outside. But that's now, for the longest time, my association with back home was very dark, just kind of a gray haze. Everything outside the house was fantastic. But growing up inside the home, there's always a lot of tension. My dad was a habitual drinker. He was not overly kind most of the time. He was definitely not kind to my mother or my sister. And just the overall dynamic was very, very negative. And, I couldn't escape that fast enough. So, it really, again, in exploring my own thoughts and kind of exploring my life, before coming in here to sit down with you, I realized like most of my 20s, like late teens and 20s, was me just searching for what it means to be a good man, and you always start first, it's like, let me find one and then I'll just emulate them, fake it till you make it. And then I got hired really young to work rescue. And I looked around and I was like, man, there's some really good and some really bad examples all wrapped up in one here. But, I spent most of my 20s, looking for that, and I was very, very fortunate to find that in a number of people. And even I found that in a person that I didn't really realize what I had in an example of just being a good human before I even left home. And I don't know if I'm going off track, steer me back
you're
on,
fine. Carry on
point. But in high school, there was one of the school bus drivers at my high school, a guy named Al Campbell. He looked like every painting of Jesus you've ever seen, right? So like long, unkempt, like dirty blonde hair, a big gray beard, and he wore flip-flops. He was the hippy dippy school bus driver. And he was my best friend's school bus driver. And one day my best friend, Pat, growing up, he told me, he's like, hey, you got to come check this guy out, man. He's wild. So he also happened to be the youth pastor at the local Presbyterian church in Homestead. So, I was like, okay, let's go. Went and met this guy, and he was wild. Like he lived an entire life before he, found his footing in religion and started walking that path. So he wasn't, as a, kind of wild, adventurous kid that wasn't looking for, wasn't looking to be proselytized for sure. He was someone I could relate to. And now looking back, I can see he saw where we were and knew how to get in touch with us and meet us where we were and keep us out of trouble and kind of give us some motivation and a nudge in the right direction. But he's the guy that got me into surfing, which ended up being a huge part of my life. Not so much anymore, just because of proximity to a surfable beach. But yeah, a great example there. I just wish I'd have exploited it for more, when I had it. But I had a few other like just awesome men that I was able to latch onto, at like formative points in my early adulthood. That and I learned a lot from, and I still carry that stuff forward.
Did you ask Al what he did in the past? Because if he said carpentry, maybe it was actually Jesus, and that would be even more crazy.
I'd believe it. No, he. I do know he spent some portion of his life just basically living on the beach, I believe. But yeah, awesome guy. I haven't spoken with him in years. I'd love to reconnect with him. But yeah, most of my 20s I spent was looking for that, and then I started kind of sort of figuring it out. I was like, had this track, I was working rescue. It's like, okay, I'm going to do my 30 years and I'll retire. I got a real job, making some money. I was in a prior relationship at the time. I was like, all right, we got this thing figured out. We're going to work this job and save up enough to buy a house, white picket fence, barbecues in the backyard, the whole nine. And, that relationship ended badly. And I did end up in a dark place. And one of the things I was hoping to talk about today was just mental health in general. I have my own story, but we've also seen tragically, far too many colleagues and friends and people close to us, lose their struggle with mental health, at their own hand, which is tragic, because I've been there, and I kind of went back and forth on whether or not I wanted to touch on this, but if I know who at least some portion of your audience is, and if this can be of value to any of them, I am happy to explore it. But I've been there. I've been to the end of my rope. And I've been at the highest you can be, and everywhere in between. So I'll kind of just float that one out there to you. Happy to go wherever you'd like with that, if you'd like to go anywhere with it.
Yeah, no, I would love to. But let's roll the clock back first. You mentioned about, obviously some of the negativity in your life seemingly coming from your father. Did you know his parents? Was there that generational indication there?
Sure. So I knew my grandmother well. I knew my father's mother well. My grandfather died just before I was born, so I never got to know him. But I heard of him, and he was a short-tempered man as well, by all accounts. Very successful man with a cool story. He was a photographer, apparently pretty renowned. Did some really cool stuff there. But yeah, speaking to your question, he sounded mean, and I think my dad really took after him.
Well, you mentioned about finding yourself in the world of rescue. Was that fire rescue? Was that a different kind of rescue?
Yeah, so and my entrance into rescue is to fire rescue. This whole world was really interesting and random too. So first, I'll answer your question. So I my first job in fire rescue was working for the smallest county in the state of Florida, Union County. It was a fully volunteer fire service with paid EMS. So I got hired as a single cert paramedic in a county that had 2 rescues.
Talk to me about your EMT paramedic school experience.
Oh, that was fantastic. So I when I left home, I wanted anything but to be a firefighter, right? And the reason for that was I got pushed so hard. A lot of family worked in the fire service. My dad, again, on again, off again, but he worked in the fire service. And they all said the same thing, like 24, 48, you're going to love your job. You never work a day in your life, this, that, and the other. And, I was a kid that knew better. So I was like, you guys are idiots. I'm going to go get rich doing something, and I'm leaving. So I left, went off and started college. I started a history major because that was my favorite subject. And I ended up landing on political science because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I did decide, I was like, well, I'm pretty good at arguing. Like, let's go that route. I'll be a lawyer, right? And along the way in Gainesville, Florida, I met some pretty incredible people that happened to work for the fire service. And, there were guys, a handful of years older than me. They were cool. They were buff, big jacked up trucks. And, they told me they work for the fire department and they love it. And all the ladies want them and, all the great things. Very, very much presented themselves as the rock stars that they were in their own world. But I was like, hey, I'm in. There's actually a lot shorter track to get to that too. So it kind of brought me around to it. So I went to EMT school because of the timeline to when the next fire college cohort was going to start. So I went first responder school, then EMT school. And in EMT school, I really did develop an affinity for the EMS side of things. So I was like, I'm going to just go straight to paramedic school. And always with plans to come back and, do fire college and be a firefighter. But after paramedic school, I needed a job bad. It was competitive back then. So I applied any and everywhere within any kind of feasible driving distance. And I got a call from James Goody Goodwin in Union County, Florida, and said, we want to offer you a job, or we want to bring you in for an interview. So I went and interviewed, got hired, and it I wish there was a path where I could have worked there for an entire career. My life took a different course and I didn't end up staying, but man, especially now where I am in the EMS world, flying, the experience I got there, the folks I got to learn from there, I got hired into a group of guys that had all been there for forever, right? It was tight, small circle, and you had to earn your way in, right? It was very much sink or swim. Questionably, I mean, the ethically questionable, how they did it, but it wasn't out of hate, right? It wasn't out of hate or hazing or anything like that. It was just like, hey, we're a tight circle. We know it. You've got to earn your way in, like sink or swim. Let's go.
What are some of the stories of that razor edge being navigated, seeing as we're sitting here after a big national news story broke out of the arrests after a hazing incident here in Marion County?
Sure. So it wasn't so much hazing. There was a little bit of that, right? It was more, hey, new guy, go do this. Hey, new guy, go do that. Like, hey, guess what? You're washing all the rescues this morning and we're going to have breakfast. So there was some of that. And, but I think it was not unhealthy.
It's a crucible.
Right. And I think there was merit to it. And honestly, I'm glad, to have experienced that. No, the sink or swim component came more, which is arguably worse, but more on the actual call side of things, right? Like as a baby paramedic, working in a rural EMS service, 45 plus minutes from the nearest real hospital, from the nearest trauma center, you had a heavy weight on you to perform, right? You couldn't fake it. You weren't 5 minutes from a hospital. You couldn't just throw them in an ambulance and go. You had to treat people, and you had to treat people well.
Was this pre or post GPS technology?
So this was post GPS technology, pre Union County catching up with that.
Oh, okay.
These are map book, like pulling out the map book days. Yeah, we used to have to ask dispatch for directions. They would give it to us, and we'd be given landmarks, right? Like, do you know where the tree is that so-and-so flipped their tractor 3 years ago? Literally.
That's how England is. There's no north, south, east, west. If you drive in England, everything's, all squirrely. So it's literally that. Find the big oak tree, then turn left at the post office. Then you're going to see a letterbox, and if you, I don't know how they did it back then, but Hialeah, we still didn't have MDT's directions, anything. Okay. And I'd have to go to Jackson on a trauma call and, brand new guy, never even been in South Florida before, and navigate that with Willie, I forget his last name now, Guerrero. No. Anyway, screaming at me. You're going the wrong way, up this way. So yeah, for anyone that's never had to drive emergency calls without GPS technology, I have so much admiration for that generation. I got to kind of just skirt it before we got into MDTs that told you how to go.
Sure. Yeah, no, we still had paper charts too, the bubble sheets. We had to handwrite them. But yeah, I'm glad to have experienced that as well. It is almost like a badge of honor of sorts. It's like, you kids don't understand. I was around before all this technology, but I guess that's indicative of me turning into that guy, right? In a sign of age. But no, it was very much when, as a baby medic orienting with the county, I got paired with a more senior medic, and you were not going to get much help. Right. It's like, hey, this is what you're going to experience. So show us that you can hang with it or not. And the thought process was like, you can go deep into the weeds on any of these clinical topics, any disease process, any acute injury or condition, whatever. You can go as deep into the weeds as you want on any one of those. But there's something too, like, can you treat sick people or not? And that's what they were trying to filter out, right? That's what they were trying to weed out. And, once you, I guess, showed a certain level of proficiency, of resilience, ultimately, then they'd really, they took me under their wing, showed me the ropes, taught me so much. And, I appreciate those guys for it. I do things a bit different in my training role, but I do try to keep some, echoes of that baked in for sure.
I've kind of seen that as well. There's some crews I've experienced in the past where, the rookie has to clean everything while they all sit down. And the best crews I've been with are like, no, we're all clean together, because you need to then do, closed cab compartment checks and tests and go pull hose and throw ladders. Like, we don't need you cleaning cars. We need you learning how to do the job. And I always respected that. Yes, there's a point where the rookie should be first to the dishes and up first to make the coffee and all these things. But if they're just doing all the housework, how the hell are they going to get any better at their job?
Yeah. And they certainly let me jump right in on weekly evening poker too, and took all my, all my money, what little money I did have.
Were you a medic by that point?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was it 2-person on the rig, EMT driver and a medic in the back?
Yep. So it was EMT medic configuration. There was 2 rescues for the entire county. I think the population of the entire county back then was like 17,000 or something like that. But I haven't seen numbers on this, but that has to be the highest per capita, like, sick county in the state. Like, we were busy. And again, we're really far from any hospital, but yeah, it was an EMT medic configuration. The fire service there was 100% volunteer. And, those folks that staffed that volunteer fire service are some of the best, highest quality people I have ever met in my life. They're getting nothing from it. That department has zero support, from a monetary standpoint coming from above them. I can speak to these things now because I don't work there anymore, but the county commission was not supportive of emergency services out there at all. So these folks were legitimately volunteering because it was their, again, you talk about being a civilian versus a citizen. They're citizens just out there doing right by their community. And they'd respond to medical calls in the middle of the night, when you needed an extra pair of hands in the back, right? With just a sick person.
Yeah.
It was nothing fun. It wasn't a structure fire. It wasn't something sexy that they could take a selfie and put it on the internet. They're just good people that were volunteers. And I have so much respect for that. And I got to see a lot of those guys for the first time in like 15 years last weekend.
Oh, really?
Sadly I was at a funeral, but man, it really, it was a really cool touchstone to go back to, go back there, see those guys, catch up with them. And, to speak to the quality of the humans, these are folks I haven't seen in 15 years. Every single one of them, I was met with a hug, which is pretty incredible and nostalgic. And, as sad as the thing that brought us together was, I really enjoyed catching up with them.
The person that you lost, was that one of the rescue side team?
So it was a former coworker in that county's son, actually passed away in a car accident.
Awful.
Yeah.
So you talked about 2 rescues in an entire county. Before we move on, what were some of the idiosyncrasies of that kind of dynamic that most of us in the municipal world wouldn't even understand?
Sure. So first is a lack of resource, right? Like there's going to be one medic on most calls, right? So as the medic, I'll speak to that because that's what my, the seat I sat in when I was there. From a clinical patient care standpoint, it's all on you, right? You got plenty of helpers usually, folks that are happy to jump in and proficient with what they do, but directing a course of care, decisions, do we stay, do we go? That can be a incredibly difficult decision. And that's like the simplest base level. So I guess speaking to idiosyncrasies, that's the biggest one. It's on you, and you can't fake it because you're so far from hospitals, right? Like you can't just, a neb and a blanket isn't going to work. You have to treat people, and you got to treat people well, or it's going to show. And how it shows is bad outcomes, that you're responsible for. So, it's funny exploring that. I hated that job for probably the first year and a half I did it. And the reason I hated it was because of how much pressure I put on myself to perform. I was like constantly just nickel and diming myself with scenarios. What if I see this and I don't know what to do? And what if I got to intubate somebody and I can't get the tube in and we can't ventilate them and they die and it's all my fault, and this poor person's family's going to suffer because I wasn't prepared. I would lose sleep over it. I hate it. Like I loved it, but I hated it at the same time. And then, at some point, there's usually junctures you can point to where you have a super sick patient or some noteworthy high acuity call that goes well. And, you kind of latch onto that as like, okay, maybe I do have it figured out enough to survive. And, at some point way back when, you can't really point to it on a timeline, but I really did start enjoying it and thriving. And, wanted at that point in my life, I wanted to take that route as far as I could, which is ultimately what led me to leave Union County and then ultimately pursue, a flight career.
I had the same exact thing. I used to be terrified sometimes when certain kind of calls would come in, like pediatric calls. One of our, it's Orange County as well, but certainly in Reedy Creek, one of the guys that we had, one of the medics, was also a nurse in, I forget the name of the hospital now, but a pediatric hospital. So, that kind of person obviously probably wouldn't have felt as uncomfortable. But, a lot of us, we don't treat, big emergent calls on children normally. So like you said, pediatric intubation and getting the drug doses right used to get my heart through my throat. But that's because you care. That's because you actually, hopefully are a good EMT or a good medic. But what I've been reflecting on recently is we do a very bad job in the EMT and medic school world of setting us up for failure when it comes to our expectations. Because if you take the mega code, for example, they go into the first rhythm, you treat it, you defibrillate, whatever it is. Okay, now they're Brady. Okay, now you give atropine, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, congratulations, normal sinus, you got a pulse. And so they always live if you don't fuck it up. But that's not the real world. 4%? I think it's something like that, depending on where you work. And I've been the Grim Reaper my whole fucking life. Like, I haven't saved a single person that's been in full arrest ever in 14 years, including on a plane as a bystander a couple of years ago. That one didn't make it either. So I've got, hands of death. But that's just, the luck of the draw. In this case, the bad luck of the draw. It's not that I was a bad medic. It's not that I did all these things wrong. It's just that they were GI bleeds and they were AAAs and they were, hearts that just weren't going to come back to life again. So I've put this to a few people. I think in our training and in mega codes and in, final exams, etc., we should have scenarios where you do all these different rhythms. You give the drugs, you give the, electric therapy or whatever is needed, and they die and they say, that was amazing. Good job. And you're like, what? So no, you did everything right. They still die because that's what happens in the real world sometimes, or more often than not. So don't look at that as a failure. And I think that would then bake in when we go out into the real world that every time that you're doing a full arrest, of course, you're trying to save that person. But there's a likelihood that they're not going to survive, especially if you have the kind of career that I have, whereas I see all these people, the code saves and they come to the station the next week with a cake. None. But that's all right, because again, you take your job seriously, you do it right, you gave that person every chance. But I think it's an interesting, question for the EMS world is like, why not bake in scenarios where you congratulate a student on, successfully performing everything that they should have, but the outcome still being death, because that's what's going to happen when they get out there.
Yeah, so I fully agree with that, and I'd also say that there's as much of an onus on the senior guys out there to do the same, right? And on the job training, keep an eye keep an eye out on your junior guys, right? That are going to wear every bad outcome. They're going to wear that heavy. It's going to weigh on them. They may not show it. They're likely not going to tell you, man, I'm really sad and I feel awful about that. If they did great, like take it and run with it, have that conversation. But most of them aren't going to tell you. If you're paying attention, you'll see it. So that's on us, right? The more senior people to look out for that and also do our best to prepare folks for perceived failure, at very least, if not real failure.
So in the Union County career, what are some of the career calls that you remember?
Sure. Yeah. So there's, there were a few. So the most noteworthy is probably we had it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. And as with most small towns, there's a handful of, notable families, right? And, distinguished people. One of those people was murdered as part of it was actually a shooting spree that a man that worked for him went on through the county, Like he started in one place, which is basically on one end of the county, worked his way through from one end of the county to the other, shooting people in sequence that, with intent. He had people he was looking for to shoot. So working rescue that day, we just, it started with one. I was up at it's like a wellness check, I think, north end of the county, and a gunshot page went out, and a gunshot wound page went out in town in Lake Butler. So we cleared that call and started heading to it, and we had probably a 15-20 minute drive just to get back to town. That's like how remote and spread out this county was. And on the way, more and more pages kept going out for just like sequential gunshot victims, to where it turned into like a legitimate, like you learn in EMT school, like, hey guys, is the scene safe? Like, what's going on? So we got with the sheriff's department, got with deputies, and we're like, hey, are we safe to proceed in? They're like, we don't know what's going on.
Great, thanks.
But yeah, it was pretty chaotic, but I think ultimately 6 people ended up shot, including the shooter. Once he had satisfied his literal list of people that he had set out to shoot, he shot himself, and he was actually the first patient we responded to. Yeah, we responded to these, just how the calls came in geographically. We responded to them in like reverse order. But so we ended up, my team, and fortunately the other rescue that was on that day, they were on their way back to county, so they were able to respond as well. But we signal 7'd a few, and then transported 2 to the hospital that ended up living.
2 in the same rig, or 2, 1 in each rig?
No, 1 in each ambulance, but 2 of the entire event, 2 patients were transported and lived.
Crazy. So talk to me about that. You've got this scene that's unfolding. PD doesn't seem to understand fully as far as whether it's safe or not. What were the decisions made to get to those patients?
Sure, that's a really good question. And for me, I was the senior guy on that day, and I was probably 4 years in. So I was still a junior guy in the grand scheme of things. Even though, before that call rang out, I was riding high, high man on the totem pole. But we basically we responded to people. We had to triage it from ambulance, right? So we're getting as much information as we can, and we ultimately just responded to incident locations. We responded to scenes geographically, like which one are we closest to? Let's go there. Then to the next one. We put out a request for mutual aid, which out there was hit or miss whether or not it would be answered. But we did have deputies able to make access to patients and give us, some semblance of a report. So we did our best to triage, and ultimately sequentially over the course of probably an hour, as sad as that is, we made it to our first patient that wasn't dead, and started. And at that point, there was 2 left. We had 2 units available, so we each took one, treated, and transported to the trauma center.
So that was Union County. Where did you go next, and what made you transition?
So after I left Union County to move right across the river, right across the county line to Bradford County, Florida. And the reason I did that was I had decided that I wanted to take my EMS career as far as I could, right? And that meant pursuing a job as a flight paramedic, ultimately. And Bradford County was operating at a higher level from a standard of care standpoint. They did more training, they had more resources, and I would have more access to one of the men I mentioned earlier that ended up being a huge influence in my life, Dr. Pete Giannis. He was the medical director for Bradford County, virtually lifelong resident of the county that everybody knew. He had a primary care office as well. Everybody knew Dr. Giannis, but on the EMS side, he lived and breathed EMS. I mean, he was there at the station every day. He was available. He was constantly training with the folks working for him. And I just wanted exposure to it. I wanted exposure to that. I wanted to learn from him, learn from them, learn how to do the job better. And again, facilitate my goal of maximizing my career in EMS.
What did the training look like to transition from ground paramedic to flight medic?
So it's actually an interesting question. So on the flight side, we train less frequently, but more intensely, right? So when I worked in Bradford County, we had mandatory paid monthly training. You were going to train every single month, clinical, logistics, operations, the whole nine, but heavy emphasis on the clinical medical component of it. And we got really, really good. Like we were really good at the job. And I still say it, you know, I fly all over the world, really. We have fixed wing capability at the program I work for. That's one of the best run, highest functioning EMS services out there. And I say that with a heavy dose of pride because I work there, right? And I can say I came from it, from Dr. Giannis. But I guess to your question, on the flight side of things, we do all of the same training and then just take it layers and layers deeper, right? So clinically, we're going to explore each condition deeper, right? We're going to have more tools to treat each thing with. We're also going to train, and we do train outside of the typical just paramedic scope because we do function as an extension of the hospital system that owns the helicopter program. And they like to market us as being able to bring the ICU to you. And that's very much true. There's not much we can't do in the helicopter that a provider in any ER or ICU couldn't do, short of, you know, full-on surgical procedures. But with that, another thing we do is we train the basics hard, right? And we do a lot of collaborative training with different hospitals, different EMS agencies. The most frequent request we get from EMS agencies when we engage to do collaborative training with them is they all want airway training. And, you know, we show up, and I think most of the EMS agencies out there, when we first walk through the door, they're expecting us to have some groundbreaking, high speed, you know, newfangled, high tech airway management techniques and tools. And while some of that's true, there is an element of that. You know, what I tell every single one of them is like, hey guys, intubations are stressful, right? It's like a stressful thing. It's scary, you know, especially the hard ones that you know are going to be hard. There's a one trick that's going to take all the stress out of your intubations almost instantly. And that's when you reach the point that you feel confident that you can BLS ventilate any human you come across. And that's what we train. And that's what will make you better at intubating, right? Is knowing that like, hey, if I can't get this tube inside their trachea, like no sweat, we can still ventilate them, right? Less than ideal, we still ventilate them. So that's a bit in the weeds there, probably more than you were looking for. But I guess to go back to your question, we train less frequently, just, you know, off of availability, really. And I'm sure funding to an extent, but, we train less frequently, but more concertedly, I'd say.
I think if you listen to any high functioning teams, I hear it from the SEALs, you know, the Green Berets, the SAS, it's the basics that they're drilling, you know, because again, as they say, you fall to your level of training. And I'm, you know, removed a little bit from the fire service now, but there's this whole like insta-famous, borderline narcissistic element to the fire service now, where every man and his dog is filming themselves doing a forcible entry prop or duck walking, spinning the hose, which I still don't understand. You know, just freaking crawl and grab it and, you know, could put the fire out. But that being said, the more of that you seem to need to justify your existence, the fewer times you're just pulling a crosslay. Or like you said, using a BVM and an MPA, or, you know, things that, you know, then, okay, I can fall back to that. And it reminds me when I was a medic student here, great crew, but we had a call and it was a wellness check, well-being check. And this poor lady had been on the floor of her home for 3 days. Her tongue was in the, you know, it just filled the entire space, but she was still, all the vitals were normal, sat in at 98, you know, blood pressure was good, pulse was good. And the choice was made by the actual medic to intubate. And again, I was thinking, well, why don't, you know, if she's doing well now, then you literally do high flow, monitor the airway. And then, you know, obviously if things change, then you adapt. But, so they ended up, paralyzing her and then putting a king tube in because you couldn't intubate. It was a 3, is it Mallampati scale? I forget the term, but big tongue scale. And this poor woman, then we get to the ER, and one of those horrendous, arrogant type ED doctors waltzes in, pulls out the freaking toolbox of intubation tools. There's blood coming out the tube. He can't get the tube. And it all would have been avoided if, like you said, in that particular one, like, okay, we probably need, a kaleidoscope and an anesthesiologist, someone who's in the perfect environment. She's not, decompensating or anything. She is stable at the moment. Just put a, BLS airway in, ventilate if you have to. But I mean, she's probably just going to need that and a, a non-rebreather. But by, like you said, deviating from the basics, I don't know if that woman lived. Now, she might not have lived regardless, but the treatment she got made it worse, not better. And I think that's such an important thing that you hear from your profession, from these high-level warfighters, is they're not doing the freaking Shaolin Kung Fu version of they're just getting really good at the most basic things. And then, as you build your experience and you have a bigger toolbox and you're exposed to more calls, we could try this too. But if you don't know how to decide when not to intubate, that is, I would argue, one of the most important, first questions for yourself.
No, I fully agree. I mean, one of the signs of mastery is knowing when less is more, right? So yeah, I've seen that. And I'll go back to what you kind of mentioned briefly there in passing, this social media craze and this look at me in my sexy uniform. We get that in the aeromedical world too. And I won't reference where specifically I work, but if you end up one of my orientees and I catch you taking selfies and posting them all over Instagram when you're orienting with me, we're going to talk.
This is a humble profession, and they say that, the term silent professionals in the military, and there's no reason to be silent. If you're silent, you're not going to change things. If you're silent, people aren't going to learn and challenge the norm and innovate, etc. But there's a difference between being humble and, what we're seeing now. And I've said this on here so many times. When I see a picture of a crew leaning on their pipe poles in front of someone's burnt out home that was full of all their memories, the paintings on the fridge and their kids' toys and the things they put in the attic from generations before, and all you're thinking about, well, I need this for my Facebook page or my Instagram or my TikTok. Absolutely. If the PIO takes pictures, the paper takes pictures of you fighting the fire, 100%. Find somewhere away from their home and take a crew picture, amazing. But have some fucking consideration for these people. The car behind them, their teenager died 3 days later. You know what I mean? That we got to hold ourselves accountable for that part too.
I agree. But at the same time, it's a dangerous game to play, right? Like if you don't find humility yourself, it'll find you. Those tend to be the less proficient, less hard training, taking the job less serious than they, take themselves. They will be humbled, unfortunately, sooner or later.
What about skills, innovations that you have on the helicopter or the plane that we don't have as a regular ground paramedic?
Sure. So mostly redundancy for everything, right? Vasoactive drugs, vasoactive medications, so pressors. On rescue, you may have epi and levofed or epi and dopamine, something like that. We're going to have 6 or 7 of them. So we'll have different options, which allows us to fine tune, with more accuracy for more specific, patient sets. We do have more tools, more fun stuff to play with. And we do have, even though, like I mentioned, we hard focus on the basics, as hard as anything else, we do have the sexy stuff too. We start arterial lines, we start central lines, we carry and place chest tubes, managing airways. We're going to have more redundancy there. We'll have, more ways to do that. I'm glad to see the EMS world, fire rescue world, follow suit and catch up in this regard. But we've had video laryngoscope technology for a long time. Whereas most ground EMS programs haven't. But I do think they're catching up in that regard. Basically more redundancy, more options for any given thing. and more procedures, I guess, just the ability to operate on a slightly higher level.
How do you become proficient at some of those skills like chest tubes? Is that ER time at that point?
Yep. So the program I work for is really good at giving you in-hospital orientation time just to do procedures and get skills in. It was elective when I was hired, but it's mandatory now. They have a much more robust, structured orientation process that, and for good reason. So you do get training. You do have proficiencies you have to maintain. So training throughout the year, you'll be checked off on, performing procedures on a mannequin, on an intubation head, whatever, simulating it. But you do have to maintain a certain whatever predetermined look back. So a 3-month or a 6-month look back to having one of those procedures, right? So if I haven't started an arterial line in 6 months, I turn into a pumpkin and I get sent to the ER or to the OR and have to go actually do that procedure on a human. It's the same with airways, the same with all the invasive procedures we do. You're held to a standard, but it's also expected that you hold yourself to a standard. And if you don't also hold yourself to a standard that's somewhere above the bar, that's set, you're not going to last long.
Yeah, I think that's the conversation, and we'll get to work weeks next. But this is the thing, is a lot of times when there's any conversation in the fire service, there's either, well, it's all the administration's responsibility or it's all the firefighter's responsibility. And the answer is yes and yes. Like it's the both. It's on us to be proficient. It's on us to be fit. It's on us to be well rested. And then we can control that, especially with the rest on our days off. And that's on us. Are we going to bed properly? Are we, drinking alcohol till 4 a.m? That's our part that we own. But then also, is the environment that we work in setting us up for success? Is the union fighting fitness standards, or are they holding us as tactical athletes like they should? And that's an environmental thing. So when you've got a fired up first responder, arguably from a competitive hiring system, as we both experienced, 20 plus years ago, who's then in a good environment that lifts them up, Gainesville, Pasco would be good examples at the moment. Now you're going to have that perfect storm of positive elements that's going to just give you great firefighters and paramedics.
Yeah, fully agree with that. And I love, you mentioned a few certain departments that are, have recently or in the near past switched to a 24/72 shift structure. And that's fantastic, and that's something I can definitely speak to, having worked fire rescue on not a 24, worked fire rescue where I was getting mandatory twice a week. So it was 48 on, 1 off, 48 on forever. Just in perpetuity, it never ended, just constant beatings one after another. So I know how that goes. I know how that wears on a body. I know how that wears on a family. I know how that weighs on mental health and just what it does to people and families and communities and the quality of service that any given department is providing, right? It cuts against it. On the air medical side, we've been on 24/72s for a while. I've been working them for 12 years now, and it was around before I entered this world. Night and day difference, and I hope you don't mind me taking liberty to speak to this a bit.
Please. The last... Anyone listening knows that this is my favorite topic, so
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, well, let's go there. We'll explore it. From my seat. So my last few years working rescue, probably my last 2 years, I was noticing changes in myself, right? Like changes in my affect, changes in my general attitude. I started noticing physical changes. One day I'll never forget. I don't know I can't give you the date, but I remember the moment. I was at work, back end of a 48. So back off of a 48, it was busy. I used the restroom. And when I was washing my hands, I looked at myself in the mirror. And it just it hit me. I looked like dog shit. I looked terrible. Physically, I looked bad, right? I was gaunt, bags under my eyes. I looked older than I was. And it was in that moment where I was like, man, I really got to speed up the timeline here. And I did. So I really kind of went, full steam ahead, pursuing a flight position, and had to interview twice, but I got it. And it was night and day difference overnight, in a few ways, and then there was some lag in some other regards. So what caused the lag was that first year I told you about working EMS, how I hated the job. That started over again. Like I had all that new guy stress. What if I'm not ready? What do I need to do to prepare myself for this job? You know, oh my God, I'm working with people that are all better than me. I'm going to be exposed, you know, imposter syndrome, all those things. But once I, you know, kind of found my footing, found my stride, and settled in, having that extra day off legitimately in 115 different ways changed my life for the better, right? I looked better. I was better rested. I was in a better headspace. I had more time with my family. You know, and now looking back, being able to take stock, I mean, it showed in so many ways. Also, I can speak to the function of the organization. Folks aren't getting mandatoried on the flight team. You know, yeah, there'll be a shift that, you know, they're looking for coverage here and there, but there's usually somebody willing to pick it up because everybody's not beat into the dirt. Mm-hmm. You know, we have 4 shifts, they're staffed, and we don't go out of service for staffing. So, you know, any of you, I'll also speak to, you know, the counties that haven't adopted this yet. You know, again, like I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of collaborative training with EMS programs, fire rescue programs, schools. This is recent too. This was within the last month. We went and did an LZ safety class with one of the local fire rescue / EMT first responder colleges in our area here. And the class I was speaking to was a class full of EMTs. There's probably 30 students. And I was chopping it up, you know, talking to all of them, asking them all the questions, you know, like, hey, what are your goals? Where do you want to go? You know, where do you want to end up? Have you applied anywhere? What are you thinking? And I kept getting atypical answers to that setting. Like usually you hear the 3 big departments right in this general immediate area. But no, I was consistently getting answers for counties that were hours away. You know, counties that are on like the bottom half of the state. And, you know, so I started asking, I was like, hey, are you from there? And they're like, no, but they're on 2472s. And that made me so happy to hear. Because when I came into this world, the fire rescue world, it was competitive. Like I applied, I interviewed many places before I got an offer, before I got an invite to actually sit down for an interview. And whatever your first offer was, you took it. Mm-hmm. You know, you took it and ran with it and held on for dear life. So I'm glad to see that the landscape is such that these young folks coming into the profession, one, have the ability to curate where they want to work first, and 2, that they have the awareness to factor that in. So I'm going to speak to 2 groups of people right now, if you don't mind.
Please.
So first, anyone out there that's looking to go this track. So if you're looking to be an EMT, paramedic, firefighter, work in the air medical world, work in the hospital, wherever, please, if there's one thing you take from this podcast, do not sell yourself short. You have time. Find the place that's going to be the best, healthiest place for you to land, right? Like, do that. You know, and that may be the first place you interview, but it may not. Just don't rush to jump in. And if you have to take that first job, just keep your head up, keep your eyes on the horizon, and pay attention to yourself, because these jobs will beat you down. They will take from you without giving back and without caring how you're doing, right? And I have another opinion to share on that if you bring me back to it at some point in the future. And this is what I'm going to speak to what we're doing at the Incomologists. But so anyone aspiring to join any of these professions that we're speaking to, please bear that in mind. You do have a choice, you do have a say, and you definitely have a vested interest in where you land. 2, I'd also like to speak to all the leaders out there. I understand this is, likely perceived as a paradigm shift, or, it's a big change, right? It's a big change to consider, but it will serve you well to consider making this change. The data sets out there, James spoken to it ad nauseum. The data supports, it's not empiric anymore. It's not just a concept that sounds good. This will be a positive for your team. It'll be a positive for your whomever you're serving, city, county, hospital, patients, whatever. It's going to be a benefit to them, and it's going to be a benefit to you. And if the positive incentive isn't enough, your hand will be forced, because the landscape is such where folks are able to choose where they want to work. So take that for what it's worth, the grain of sand coming from a lowly flight paramedic. But, I've been around long enough to see the landscape change. And in some ways, I'm thrilled with what I'm seeing. In other ways, I'm horrified.
That's a really powerful perspective, especially coming from the 24/48 world. When you started seeing this shift, when you were looking in the mirror and seeing an old man looking back, after how many years had you had on at that point?
That was probably 8 years in.
Exactly. Of a potentially 25, 30-year career. So this is the point. It's not, like you said, it's irrefutable on the science side. It's irrefutable on the neighboring departments that we've had that have gone. I was just talking to Pasco County's president again today, and it's just unending success, from morale to now they're negotiating pay because they've got the good work week. Now it's like, okay, well, how can we put some things in that will then factor into, as people top out and that kind of thing, that we can get it back? Because they gave up a lot of as they were talking to me, he was telling me, the top end stuff was kind of given away to attract people by making starting pays better. Well, if you attract people with a healthy working environment, now you can go back and help the air quotes old guys more, where, you can top out at a higher level. And you can go to your county or your city and say, well, look, we saved you millions by all this overtime that's gone away. And people say, where, but we've paid for all these new firefighters. Yes. So if your schools, for example, the walls are about to explode because you had so many students and a terrible student to teacher ratio, and one day someone said, well, we're just going to build a new school. We're going to invest in our community and put a new school. Now we have another entire building full of great teachers that now we can spread the kids around. They're going to get a better ratio, better education, versus those 4 schools, about to explode and just paying overtime to the teachers to fill the spots that, you know what I mean? It's not even apples to apples. Like, you've invested in another entire shift of firefighters for the same money or less money than you were bleeding with this crisis that we have. So, I agree completely. And we were talking before we hit record. I had a lot of people that have recently said, well, I don't want my kid to become a firefighter. And I tell them, no, they should. It is the greatest calling in the world, which is why 7 years after taking the uniform off, I'm still having conversations like this. Because what you learn in the fire academy isn't the work week. It's the job. What you learn in EMT school, medic school, and flight medic school is the job. Who you work for dictates the working environment. So work for a good department, not a bad department, with a courageous chief or courageous union president that will fight for you and make sure that your working environment gets you home to your kids as much as possible. And when you are at work, that you're a high-performing, fit paramedic, firefighter, whatever your goal is. And just to your point, if you're coming out of the Florida Fire College, for example, in our town here in Ocala, and someone says to me, well, where should I work? I'm going to tell them Pasco or Gainesville, hands down, because they are 4 shifts, fully staffed. They're getting these veterans in all these classes now. So even, their new hires have got years on the job. That's who you want to be around, full stop. And so, yeah, if you are resisting this movement, and as I said, which really nauseates me, and I'll underline it again, you are from the generation that created this crisis in the first place, and you go home at 5 o'clock every night and you sleep well knowing that your men and women are getting mandatoried, and there's cancer and there's heart disease and there's suicides and divorces, and you're, unwilling to make the change, then step aside and let a real leader in. Because as I've said many, many years, you can be the person who turned the ship around and be the hero of your own story, or you can be the person that went down with the ship. You caused the ship to fail. So who do you want to be? Because one of those two is coming. And if you don't change, and all these young people, these fired up, firefighter, EMTs, and paramedics are going to these good departments, you think you have a recruitment crisis now? Just you wait.
Yeah, amen.
I want to move forward to the incomologists, but while we're on the flight medic, we talked about your perspective as far as what you want, in the airframe. For us on the ground, what's some advice that you would give the EMTs, the paramedics, to set you guys up for success as far as patient transition?
That's a really good question. And the first thing I'll speak to is safety, right? That was a big shift when I went from, ground EMS to air medical was there's a safety culture, right? Legitimately and for good reason. It's much more dangerous to fly around in a helicopter. There's a million moving parts. They're all moving really fast, and it's like kind of pure magic what actually makes the thing fly. But where I'm going with this is to your question. We are largely reliant on whomever is on the ground, wherever we're going, to keep us safe, especially if it's an austere scene. It's not a pre-designated landing zone or somewhere that's, already been given the papal blessing as safe to land there. We'll come get to you for sure, but we're relying on you to make sure, we're not going to land on a power line or there's not something on the ground that we can't see. That's, I guess, one piece of advice I'd give is don't assume because you on the ground can see something that we can see it. We likely can't. Everything looks different from up there, and everything's a lot smaller. So hyper communicate. Ideally, you'll have radio contact between the helicopter and whoever's LZ command or scene command. Just hyper communicate any and everything you see that you think may be a factor that could affect the safety of us landing and getting in and out of a helicopter. We got it from there. The more patient information you can give us early, the better we can prepare. But I would just stress, think safety, and then we'll get a patient report once we get there.
We didn't really talk about the first responder kind of nursing dynamic as far as your marriage and family. So before we move to the incomologists, talk to me about what your wife does as a profession, and then let's talk about the dynamic of that over the last, several years that you've been together.
Sure. So my wife, Leanne, she was a flight paramedic as well. She retired year before last after 24 years in clinical healthcare, which is wild for me to say because it's indicative of my own age. But it's also wild because you look at her and she looks like 10 years younger than I do, which isn't fair. And it's exclusively why I do CrossFit and go to Iron Legion Strength and Combat. But, speaking to our careers, she actually still worked rescue PRN when I was at Bradford County. So that was the first time we worked together. And, it was really interesting. I never worked with, a partner before, a spouse. And we actually did work rescue together a few times, schedule slipped through the crack, we were kind of like, should we say something? Like, no, let's do it. And those are probably the most stressful shifts I've ever had because of the pressure to perform. It's like, man, I really got to perform in front of this chick. It was pretty early in our relationship. But just broadly speaking to, our parallel career paths and being together and married through them, it's been a lot of good and a lot of bad too, but mostly good. The pros, the pros to marrying someone in the same field, I would say there's a mutual understanding of the demands of the job. The mutual, the understanding of when one of you experiences something impactful in a negative way or even a positive way, your partner understands what that means, right? So you are able to dial in and really look out for each other, and there's one call in my whole career that like really, really hit me hard and, kind of took me to a dark place for a while. And honestly, I couldn't imagine like kind of working through that one without Leanne and without her understanding what that call meant and like what it did to me, or how it weighed on me. So, mutual support, mutual understanding. We were able to sync our schedules up pretty early in my career at the flight team, and she was working in the same flight team. So we, on a 24, 72-hour schedule, we had 3 out of every 4 days off together, which just opened the world up to adventure and maximizing our time together, which we still do. It's our overarching priority. in life, every macro decision is based on maximizing our time together, which is fantastic. And while we were both working in this world, owe a lot of that to the career. There's cons too, work-life creep. It's hard to separate the two. And, interestingly, we're working together, the Incomologists now too. So kind of same dynamic there, but from a different angle, with a different flavor. But, separating work life and non-work life can be a real challenge. It can lead to, a hyper focusing on the negative aspects, the downsides to the job, the gripes. It can lead to ruminating, to an unhealthy degree. And, you just hope that one of you, you switch off, like who's going to be the one that kind of pulls us out of this rumination cycle. But there's that. And then also, this is a bit tongue in cheek, I guess, but, having intertwined professional relationships can oddly be difficult to navigate, right? So I used to speak at a lot of conferences, and I kind of throttled that back because I kind of prided myself on like making noise. If I was speaking at an EMS conference, I was going to throw some darts at the medical director sitting in the back of the room, like let's ruffle some feathers and, prove me wrong, But at a point, I realized that I'm also representing Leanne, so I may have to put a plug in it.
I can relate, by the way.
Yeah, but yeah, you certainly can. But also, seeing, through these fields, you'll meet some of the best and some of the worst humans, and I've found that everywhere I've worked. You'll meet the best and worst people you've ever met in your life, in the same place. And, there can be a degree of toxicity in any culture. And there certainly is some degree of toxicity in the air medical world. And, I will speak to Leanne's experience here, and I'm not speaking for her. It's her story to tell. But I had a seat at that table, and it affected me, as well. So Leanne, I'll try to condense it to the short version. Leanne had a long and really successful career. And toward the end of it, she was offered a leadership position at a program that, not the program she worked for. So she left to start up an air medical program across the state. Went and stood that program up, was gone for 3-ish years, and then came back to the original program that she had been working for at the time. But she came back to that program on a different team within the program. And it was a team that had a reputation for being a boys club and didn't want her there from before day one. That was made clear. So she really fought an uphill battle. She had been around. She's mature enough to know, like, okay, just weather the storm, keep my head down, do the job and whatever. But she ultimately ended up getting bullied, for about 2 years in a really ugly way that was incredibly disappointing for me. And it was a real difficult one for me to unpack and work through, because you have these like conflicting interests, right? And conflicting things that, layers of responsibility and also accountability, right? Because they're on one level, like I'm a dude, and it's like, no, nobody's going to bully my best friend and partner in life and wife. Like, absolutely not. At the same time, professionally, I can't just go, dominant male monkey and start kicking doors down, and also, it'd be incredibly disrespectful and belittling, of me to trample her autonomy and assume that she needed me to come to her rescue. Right. Especially when I know, she's a better clinician than I am. She's been around longer than I have, had a better reputation than I did. Who am I? But I got to watch her, work through that one. I got to watch her show incredible resilience, right? Like how she kind of kept a stiff lip and just kept going back. She's like, no, I'm not going to, I'm not just going to fold and like let them win. I'm going to just go keep doing my job and do it well. Which, I I owe that side tangent for just a second. I learned so much about accountability, like self accountability to perform at your job from her. Like I have not met a person that holds themselves to a higher standard than my wife Leanne does. And it's one of the things I fell in love with her about, or fell in love with her for early on. But anywho, I saw physical changes, I saw psychological changes, I saw her affect change. She was beat down and really left, unsupported in a lot of ways. And this is part of working for, a huge organization. Help can be hard to find. And speaking of leadership, it can be hard to find a person of influence, a person in a position to actually make a difference that's willing to stick their neck out and say, well, no, hold on, guys, not kosher. This is not going to fly. So, it is kind of whimsical thought. I don't really have any real landing point, but it's a part of my story. It's definitely a part of her story. And, not to hyper focus on the negative aspects of the job, but the opportunity for that to happen is everywhere. And it's on each and every one of us to do our best to make sure that you don't let that seed take root, because this doesn't happen overnight. A team doesn't go from positive, uplifting culture to toxic dog eat dog, stand on each other's heads to keep your own head above water overnight. It's insidious, right? So it takes a degree of just situational awareness, I guess. And again, the senior folks on a team to steer that ship in another direction. And that can be done. And I can speak to that through my leadership role within the flight program. So the flight program, I serve as a flight paramedic, and I'm also the clinical base lead. So I'm responsible with no punitive authority for the goings on and operations of my base, the base my helicopter operates out of. When I took that role, I told Leanne that I was going to change the culture. I told her, I'll just say it. It's my team, so I can speak to it. My base had a reputation for drama, right? For infighting, for catty drama. Everybody was at each other's throats. Nobody was happy. It's like, dude, I'm going to turn it around. It's going to take years, but I'm going to do it. And I'll call her out. Leanne's like, no, you're not. I was like, watch me. And, I set out to do that, and I paid attention, and I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing is everybody just wants to be heard. And when you have a team of performers that we're all towards, the top of wherever they came from, one, they want to be heard, and two, they need room to perform, right? Like we're all, to get hired on the flight team, there's a minimum required experience set you have to have. So credentials, certain jobs, a number of years, but that's the floor, right? Everybody has more than that. So everybody's experienced, everybody's performed. You've got to give us room to cook and room to work. So, and I knew that early, right? Because I had the same frustration. It's like, dude, just give me room. I know what I'm doing. Like, let me go. What's that movie, The Other Guys, with Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell? Mm-hmm. There's that quote. He's like, I'm a peacock. You got to let me fly. That's us. So early on, when I asked, this is another thing. I'm the only base lead in my program's history that asked to be base lead. Everybody else, air quotes, they were asked to do it. They, of course, didn't pursue that. But no, I did. I wanted the opportunity, so I asked for it. I shot my shot, and they said yes. So early on, I worked to make sure everybody was heard and then just clear room, like clear space for everybody to work. And I did that. And also early on, and Leanne literally laughed at me when I told her this. And so I came up with 3 goals for myself. And I'll admit, these are the cheesiest. This sounds like something out of the worst self-help book you've ever read. But my 3 goals are be of utility, protect our house, and turn the frowns upside down. And, the last one's a little tongue in cheek, but truly, like, show everyone it's okay to, like, enjoy work, right? Like saying, I like my job and I'm actually glad to be here. That's not uncool. Like, it's okay. It's cool to say that. So anywho, what I'm speaking to here is if you have some awareness, if you have some humility, if you're willing to say, hey guys, I screwed this up, my bad. When the team says, hey, this thing is not working, this way we're doing something is not working, don't be intimidated by a good idea coming from south of you, right? Have some humility, know that that's not a threat to you as a leader. That's just a good idea from a team of ideally performers that probably have some good insights to contribute. Let them cook. And the culture has changed. Our team's clicking. We've been clicking for a while. We had a few key moments that I kind of latched onto, bad down periods. In 2021, we lost 2 of our team a week apart. Yeah, Joel and Daniela. Daniela passed away to cancer, and Joel to a motorcycle accident that they were partners. Daniela died, Joel died a little over a week later. I think it was 8 days. And I know that what happened to Daniela, at very least contributed to that accident happening. But I latched onto that. We were all down. We're a small team, so we're tight. We're close. It hurt, right? And the leadership at the time that's no longer around wasn't supportive of us. They weren't a presence through that. And there's one key moment, and again, not to go negative, but this happened, and I'd like to speak to it. We were at one of the funerals, and our then boss was literally same time posting selfies of himself on vacation. And everybody that was at that funeral, they were passing phones around with these pictures during the funeral. So for me, it's like, geez, what do I do with this? You can't, I was like, yeah, it bothers me too, but you can't just dive deeper into a deeper, darker place. So I latched onto it and I created a shared enemy almost. I was like, hey guys, you're right. That's like ridiculous, ridiculously tone deaf and hurtful. But hey, guess what? It doesn't matter. That's something outside of this circle, right? What matters is right here. We're all here. And that's what matters. Everything outside this circle, everything outside these walls is something else, right? That's not us. What's here matters. And then I just, I opportunistically, I guess, and you could probably pick apart the ethics of this, but I kept that theme going, and it kept us tight. And, we are where we are now, I think, in large part because of those awful junctures, losing 2 teammates, a team of 8 people. We lost 2 in a week, but something positive did come from it, and it's been lasting.
What Leanne went through, I hear this from so many people, that toxic culture, that organizational betrayal can be so detrimental, and even, I don't know if this is what you were alluding to, but even, some of these accidents, that we have, you wonder, okay, well, was that an accident, or was that technically, one of the, either sleep deprivation related things, or even, more deliberate than an accident. But I had a similar thing in the last place I worked. We lost one of my classmates to an overdose and went to his funeral. And we're coming back, like I've told this story a few times on here, but it still makes my blood boil. We put the ladder truck up there. His old department sent just one guy with the ladder truck. So we had to help him, set everything up, put the flag up, wait for the last person to leave the funeral, and then, help him break down everything as well. We got something to eat. And we're heading back. And I feel like this is kind of in line with what you're talking about with the vacation pictures. My lieutenant, there's 4 of us on this rig, gets a call saying, you need to apologize to everyone at this place because they've been running extra calls while you've been at the funeral. And so I'm just like, dumbfounded. And I get back to the station, and everyone's there. Everyone's in quarters. Everyone's in a lazy boy. And I'm just like fuming. And I don't get angry very often. And I said, please tell me that what we heard was incorrect. Oh, no, but it was being really big. I'm like, we just fucking buried one of our guys. and this is what you think is important. And it's the same thing, but I was on an island that day, and I got so angry, I basically said, I'm leaving before I do something that's going to cost me my career, because I was that fucking close to breaking jaws. I mean, genuine. I'm not an aggressive person. I'm not beating my chest. I was so disgusted. But yeah, it's that same thing. And there's a circle within that absolutely were there for him for the right reasons, that went to the funeral. But you talk about moral injury. Nothing worse than being part of a group that's supposed to care, and you're presented with something like that. And that's when the switch flipped for me in that department. That was the beginning of the end. I'm like, I cannot believe, having come from great departments, where one of the guys gets hurt and the rest of the crew all repair his roof that he'd been working on before he was hurt. You know what I mean? That kind of brotherhood and sisterhood. But yeah, so all you can do, like you said, is, find your people and then make that circle even stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. That's disappointing to hear, but unfortunately not terribly surprising.
Yeah. You mentioned early on in the conversation about some of your low points as well when we talk about mental health. Before we progress on, what were the lowest points that you found in your career, and then what were the tools that you found to navigate out of that?
Yeah, so I like how you asked that question, right? Because it's not just ruminate with me on your lowest points in life. So I'll, I a lot of this I've literally never shared with anyone before, except possibly my counselor that I see. So breaking news, folks, you're hearing it here first. I would say first, towards the end of my rescue career, I was pretty beat down. Now looking, in hindsight, it's that insidious wear and tear, shift work, the sleep, the unhealthy lifestyle, the zero regard for general wellness. I thought I was a stud, right? I looked good in a t-shirt. I did back and bis and chest and tries and ate poorly and drank too much. Didn't sleep well. But there was that. And then there's also the classic, EMS end of a marriage. It's back then it was almost like a running joke. It's like, you're not a real EMS guy until you get your first divorce. So I had a relationship that ended in a bad way, in a very negative way. And it was at a point in life where I really thought I was starting to figure things out. Again, white picket fence. I was like, dude, we got this thing figured out. Everything's perfect. I know where we're going. I'm getting mandatoried all the time, but I need the money. So we got that covered. And, and then that all changed, right? And it left me in a place where everything went from perfect and I was certain of where I was going and what I was supposed to be doing, to just being beat down and working 96 hours a week every week, staying up all night, running calls, just wake up, rinse, repeat, and do it all over again. I went to a dark place. I didn't want that relationship to end, certainly the way it did, but it did. I had a big house that was empty with just me in it. A lot of sleepless nights. So I was at a really, really dark place, and I'll speak to how I came out of that, but I'll also speak to how I kind of like grinded out surviving through it, honestly. And this is the real piece I've never shared with anybody, but I was at the end of my rope, and I was having those dark, bad thoughts. And, I guess two things really kind of kept me from making a decision to do something that, you can't come back from by design. One was, I would lay there not being able to sleep, and I'd just go work out. I had one of the 24-hour, gym memberships. 2:00 in the morning, I'd just go get in the truck and go work out. At 2 a.m, and I'd work out until I had to come home to get dressed to go back to work. And I'd do that. And then another thing, if this, man, I don't know if this is even appropriate to really like put out there. I definitely wouldn't use this as advice because it's not healthy, but I just kept deciding to do it tomorrow. Just like one more day, I'll do it tomorrow. Give it a night. And I just kept doing that, right? And then at a point, things changed and I did kind of climb back up my rope, and climbed out of the hole. But, she'll hear this now, but I've never told her this. Leanne saved my life. And I don't mean that figuratively. I mean it literally. I was at a point when we met where, I decided, I was like, man, this track I've chosen, I don't think this is for me. This didn't work out the way I thought it was going to. And I was so just despondent and discouraged about having to start over that I was at a juncture where at a point I decided, it's I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to just go do contract work and just leave entirely and just go do something totally different. But this is my skill set. This is my credentialing, So a coworker and friend of mine we were speaking to recruiters for contract agencies, and I was looking for somewhere as far away from here as I could get to just go do contract work and just leave, facilitate me leaving and going somewhere else. Maybe it'll be better. Right. And then, throughout I did maintain some focus on career progression. I was I got to get out of rescue. This is just beating the piss out of me. So I did get hired at the flight team, which was a positive, kind of helped pull me out of the hole. But then, and I also had some really, really good friends along the way that kept forcing me out of the house. And that presence was enough, to kind of keep me going in a sense, just do it tomorrow, And then Leanne slid into my DMs and you see her around, you can ask her, she'll confirm. She slid into my DMs, not the other way around. But she sent me a message, and we actually had a mutual friend playing matchmaker between us. It's pretty cool. I'm mentioning one by name, but he knows who he is. Leanne and I both know who he is. He was going to Leanne and telling Leanne that I had been asking about her, and then he was coming to me telling me that Leanne had been asking about me. And I think he saw where we both were in life and, cared about us as humans and just wanted to see us happy and together. And that's what happened, and Leanne, she showed me so much, almost immediately, right? She showed me the same world that I had been working and living in through a different lens. She was the first person I heard share a similar sentiment that I shared with you earlier. Dude, I hated this job for 2 years because I was so worried and so eaten up with anxiety that I was going to, self-imposed pressure to perform, worry that I would be underprepared for a thing. And as soon as she said it out loud, I was like, me too, but I never really had, I guess, the confidence or, awareness enough to say that out loud to another human. And also she was the first person that, really introduced the idea of off-ramps. She told me early on, she's like, hey, I don't know what your plans are, but there's an expiration date on clinical work. I was like, I like that. I think I have one of those now too. It's I'll figure out when it is, but I now have an expiration date on clinical work. I'm going to follow your lead there. And that's kind of been our story, man. I've largely followed Leanne's lead, and, we did in fact do that. She was able to retire earlier than most. We put an expiration date on clinical work, and then as we set goals and reached them, we ultimately, put an expiration date on working for just other people in general, and together, alternating who leads just through various seasons of life. We've set goals, we've met them, and, we're on a good track.
Just going back to the dark place, because then we want to talk about what you guys are doing now. I've said this on here many times. The old way that we discussed suicide was it's selfish, it's cowardly, how could they? Think of your family. And then now, as we sit here, I've spoken to over 1,200 people, many of whom have got those dark stories. And I started seeing the common denominator over and over and over again, where at that point, through the perfect storm of unaddressed childhood trauma, sleep deprivation, and side effects of alcohol and meds and all the things that come together, that their brain had been miswired to the point that they truly believed that they were a burden and they were the reason that other people were hurting. And if they could, if they just took themselves out, that would solve the problem, that their family would be happy. Now, that makes no sense to a healthy mind, but to someone in that arguably psychosis by that point, It makes perfect sense. And if you frame it that way, the people that we've lost to suicide, it must have been terrifying for them, and it probably took courage because they believed that they were solving this problem by removing the cancer, which was themselves. Did you have any of that kind of whispering in your head when you were in your darkest point?
Yeah, so, I've heard you speak to that concept before, and it's really interesting. I've thought a lot about it, and it does make a lot of sense. And it's actually really sad, to think about. But, no, honestly, I didn't. There's a lot of self-loathing, I'd explore all the ways that I deserve to be in this deep, dark place, and then I'd also have the why me? What did I do to deserve this? So it was very much a roller coaster of, thoughts and emotions and perspectives. But ultimately, when I guess to speak to, when I was at my lowest, it was mostly, it was the overall feeling, I guess, was just utter discouragement, just utter discouragement. I had worked so hard, from where I came from, working through the things I did and, setting goals and reaching them. And, we got this house and there's this track that's all we've got it figured out. We know where we're going and it's going to be so great. And we're going to do it different than how I grew up. And then, it just out of I guess it's really out of your control, but unplanned, unforecasted, that changes, and where do you go from there? And the thought of just changing course or starting over was just so, I don't know. I just I was at a place where I felt empty and listless and, just didn't want to put that much effort in all over again. And, again, 2 a.m. workouts are not healthy, but looking back, that's been the one consistent throughout my entire adult life that I've never stopped doing is exercising. And that is a touchstone. And it is a significant component of my current mental health, which is in a great place, right? Mm-hmm. So anyone that's down and out, dude, I've been there. I promise. Do it tomorrow. Don't do it. It gets better. I promise. Just grind it out. Stick with it. And if you're, like James is speaking to, feeling like it's your fault and that your people will be better off without you, it's flat wrong. Okay. So fight those feelings. But, even now, I'm in a great headspace. I still speak with a counselor, very much a proponent of EMDR, very effective. And I work out every single day. I sweat the demons out. Anyone that knows me well has heard me say that. You got to sweat the demons out. And, that's tongue in cheek too, but there's some truth to it. And, again, speaking to Leanne, all the things I've learned from her, when I was at a point of just utter discouragement with having to start over, right? That's where my head was I'm gonna have to completely start over and do all this, the last 8 years were just for naught, and I've got to do it all over again. She basically, and, in ways said, no, let's just meet here and go forward together. And that's what we've done. And it's been incredible ever since.
It's amazing to hear. And I think the thing with Iron Legion that we see as well is that you've got gyms, and I think that's fantastic. You go in there, you put headphones on, you work out, brilliant. But there are gyms like our one that when you walk through, it's not just a workout, it's a community. Mm-hmm. And I think that really does just amplify the wellness element, because not only are you still getting a workout, you're suffering side by side, you're making fun of each other. It's another entire, tribe outside of fire, EMS, flight, whatever your unit is. So I would challenge people, don't just find a gym where you're just going to sit on a pec deck and do 3 sets of 12. Find a place, that you can drop yourself in, that as soon as you walk through the door, you're kind of swept away with that community. And, after your workout, you might sit there for half an hour talking to people. I think there's so much value to that. Well, you mentioned about expiration dates. So one of the powerful conversations that comes out of, for example, a work week like 24/72 is the ability to start building an entrepreneurial project on the side, so then you can make that transition. talk to me about, what made you even have this idea, and then let's talk about all the things that you offer.
Sure. So I'll speak to the Incomologists, but if you don't mind, I will speak to the broader idea of
Please.
Having an off-ramp from whatever your current career path is. If you want one, but just please, even if you don't currently want one, at least consider the thought and leave the door open in the future. Earlier in your career, you're gonna love the job. You're gonna be all in, both feet in, hot and heavy, whatever it is. I'm a firefighter, I'm a paramedic, and I'm gonna put it all over Instagram, and everybody's gonna know, and my badge is gonna be this big, right, in the center of my chest. That does fade, and the job will wear on you. Even a 24/72 schedule, as fantastic as it may be, it's a job. It's a difficult job. There's a lot of stressors, right? Shift work is a carcinogen. You're the first person I heard speak to that. It is important to not bottleneck yourself, right? Like, leave your future open with options. So Leanne and I collectively decided, like, hey, we both love doing what we're doing, right? And we're enjoying it. And we're going to do it for a good long while. But we know at some point we're likely going to want to deviate, want to separate from that. And, our health and well-being takes precedent over the career, right? So we started looking for ways to get off of, we're looking for off ramps from the traditional find a career job, work 30 years, retire hopefully by 65, and have enough, vigor left in you to enjoy a few years before you're just flat elderly and loafing around. So, for us, we started putting thought in that, and where that all started for us was, I had sold my house and moved in with Leanne, early in my relationship. She owned a duplex. We lived in one side and rented the other, and it was magical. It was just her and I and our two cats in our little 1,000 square foot apartment, and that paid for itself. And then we started looking for more. We're like, okay, what are we going to do? Investment properties. Like, we kind of already have it. Like, let's just expand on that. So, we saved up. We lived fiscally conservatively. We lived much more fiscally conservatively than we needed to for a really long time. And the reason for that wasn't delayed gratification for the sake of delayed gratification, because there's a book that said there's merit to it. We were setting goals, and we were achieving them. And anyone listening to this podcast can do the same, in the fire rescue service. Like, every other firefighter, it seems, has a side, like, lawn service business, or, handyman service business, or pressure washing or whatever. Like, dude, get after it, but don't just stop there. Grow it. Like, put a little thought. And information has never been easier to get. Download the free version of ChatGPT. Say, hey, I have a part-time lawn service business. Help me grow it. And you can do it. And, next thing you know, maybe you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 of your firefighter buddies all working for you. And, you can go PRN and make more money and have more freedom and say over your own time. So we look for those off ramps. The Incomologists is, I'll start. Would you like me to explain, like, what we are and what we do?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are, we're a team of clinicians. Everyone on our team has a clinical background in some form or fashion. The team started with my teammate, Jake Bevilacqua, who's a CRNA. He's worked his entire adult life in clinical healthcare. He started as a first responder, volunteer, went to EMT paramedic school and then nursing school, and ultimately became a CRNA. Through a series of events and some connections, his father had actually worked his entire adult life in financial advising and owned an insurance agency. So Jake found himself in a position where he needed insurance. He was going 1099, so doing contract work. And he reached out to his dad and said, hey, I need insurance. His dad said, I'll do you one better. I'll teach you how to sell it to yourself. So he empowered Jake with those tools. Jake started helping his colleagues, his coworkers. Word of mouth spread. And then next thing you know, Jake had more people reaching out to him for insurance than he could sufficiently handle himself. So he looped me in. And this was real early in Jake and I's friendship. But we hit it off pretty fast, and he invited me. At the time, I took it as a job offer to sell insurance for him, which I had zero interest in. It's like, dude, I have streams of income. We've carved out a pretty happy life. Like, things are going good. I have no interest selling insurance. And he told me, he's like, no, it's a lot more than that. We're actually like serving our colleagues. Just, hear me out. So we went and had lunch, and I heard him out, and I saw an opportunity to do just that, right? To be of utility. Going back to my worst self-help book, 3 quotes ever, be of utility to my people at a broader scale. And I thought highly enough of Jake and wanted to work with him enough. It's like, oh, let's give it a try. And, so I started helping him out with what he was doing. And the next thing you know, it just kept growing and growing and growing to where we had more people reaching out to us for help than Jake and John could handle. So we were kind of forced to grow a team around ourselves. And we've done just that. And at this point, we're a team of 9 currently. We offer life and disability insurance, also long-term care insurance, financial planning, retirement account setups, and tax management. And we have referral pathways to a few other services. Our overarching goal is to protect and grow our colleagues' wealth. And we do that by serving as a resource for any of the services that I floated to you. All of our clients are either firefighters, EMTs, nurses, mostly CRNAs. It's everybody that's from, cut from this cloth. These are our people, and it's who we're looking to serve and protect. And on this, I will speak to, I definitely wouldn't call it a passion project, but it's a piece of what we're doing that I am quite passionate about. And we spoke, I think, at a few points throughout our chat here today on, certainly on suicide, but just firefighter death, cancer, overdoses, my friend Joel and Daniela, and, it seems far too frequently when I see someone close to me or in an overlapping circle, within this world pass away, a week later, you see a GoFundMe for the family because they're in distress. They not only lost a family member, they lost a provider, right? And they're in trouble, and a GoFundMe is not a financial plan, and it's not a solution for a family that doesn't have an income anymore, right? And, it's something, that's a risk that a family is exposed to that could be mitigated early and in a very inexpensive way, right? And this goes back to training, right? Education. The fire colleges do a great job at teaching you how to put a fire out, right? And not die while you're doing it. Paramedic school does a great job of teaching you how to treat sick people. What both of those don't do is educate you on how to live your life well in that profession, right? How to protect yourself and your family through that profession. And, term life insurance, $1 million term life insurance policy when you're early 20s and before you have a super risky job like that of a firefighter, it's so cheap, like less than $50 a month, right? And this is not an attempt to, solicit your audience at all. Certainly I'm happy to answer any questions, be a resource for education. Yeah, we sell these things, but I could care less if you buy anything from me or not. Just know that your family is vulnerable if replacement for your income is not there, right? And, to all the schools out there, to all the people that are influential in training, touch on the mental health aspect of the job, to touch on what James spoke to. Not every code is going to be not every mega code is going to result in a return of spontaneous circulation. Most of them aren't, speak to that. Speak to the nuance, the gray area around the job. Like, hey, this shift work's going to affect your future family. Your future family is going to be incredibly vulnerable to the loss of you and your income. Mitigate that. Think about it. Protection for your income, even if you don't die. Know what benefits your department or your hospital or whomever you work for offer, and what will it look like if you lose your ability to work, And that's one of the big voids we're trying to fill. We're trying to get in with schools just to give education, not soliciting, just educating them like, hey, here's some blind spots that I wish I'd have known about 15 years ago when it was affordable, but nobody told me until I grew up. So unfortunately, we met a lot of resistance, getting through the door with schools. And I understand it. What they see from the outside is, an insurance agency trying to sell insurance to their students when it really couldn't be, that couldn't be farther from the truth. But, that's who we are. That's the need we're really trying to solve, the problem we're trying to solve. And, we're trying to do it for our people exclusively.
You mentioned about this being a conversation even before you go in the fire service. Are you able to lock in a certain rate then that makes it more affordable if people get in early?
Yes. So two things affect, one overarching thing affects how much insurance is going to cost for you, right? And that's how much risk you pose to an insurance company. So the older you are, the less healthy you are, the more medical history you have, the more risky you are to insure. Because at the end of the day, that's what insurance is. You're paying to transfer risk from yourself and or your family to an insurance company. They're willing to assume that risk and they charge you money for it. That's what it boils down to. So anything about you that would make you more risky to insure is going to make it cost more. So age, medical history, we spoke to those. Also, working as a firefighter or a police officer or even a nurse, right? That nursing is hard. I saw it with my mom. I saw what it did to my mom's body after 40 something years. And the insurance companies know that. So they're going to charge you more. As a flight paramedic, if I were going to buy, a new life insurance policy right now, it would I'm 39 years old, healthy, just my job alone, it's going to be borderline unaffordable, right? Now we have options. We have different channels we can work through. Like we will find a solution for everybody. But man, if someone had put a bug in my ear before I started flying, right? If someone at the flight team had told me like, hey, before you start, you may want to consider this. Because as soon as you put this patch on and you now fly as a part of an air crew, the entire insurance outlay is entirely different for you. That would have helped a lot. So we're trying to do that for others, right? If nothing else for cost and anticipation of future needs. But also, we're happy to educate, and that's all we're trying to do, is get the good word out there, educate people, and help folks avoid the mistakes and the blind spots that we had for so long.
So if you get a policy prior to the fire, even though you're joining a profession that's arguably more dangerous, your rate stays the same?
Yeah. So with life insurance specifically, like in almost every case, there are exceptions to everything, but most policies, you're guaranteed a certain amount of coverage at a certain price for a certain period of time. That's how it works, and that's why you're incentivized to get it while you're young and healthy.
Yeah, it would be good for me. I'm a martial artist, stuntman, and firefighter. probably uninsurable when I was in my 40s, but
you'd raise a few eyebrows for sure.
All right. Well, I want to go to some closing questions. Be mindful of your time. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Sure. So I'm not, I'm sure you get a lot of nonfiction. I'm not doing that. The Thrawn series. So I'm a Star Wars nerd. So the Thrawn series of Star Wars books and the Wheel of Time series by, I don't remember the author's name, but it's like 14 books long. It's incredibly long, but it's worth it.
Brilliant. I haven't had that one recommended before. What about films, television, documentaries?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Icarus was good.
Oh, great film.
Yeah. Icarus was really, really good. The Last Dance was good. Let's see if I can think of something enriching. If you haven't watched Game of Thrones, read the books first, please. No, I'd stick with those two for documentaries.
Brilliant. Next question. Is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
There's one, but I haven't spoken with him, so I don't want to float his name yet. I think I've mentioned him to you in the past. I'm going to talk to him. I think he'd be a really good fit. It's a third generation first responder with... So my friend, former coworker that he mentored me early in my career. His dad worked for the sheriff's department, and his son is now a legacy firefighter at the fire service that he just retired for. So I think he's got a really cool perspective. He's also in he's of a generation that I think saw a lot of change, right? Like he's a generation or two before me. So he saw change from like the legit old days of doing, the old way of doing things to, present, where he just retired within the last like 3 years. So I think that'd be a cool chat. I have a question for you too.
Yeah, go for it.
If you don't mind.
No.
So I've always wondered, I know, you worked as a stuntman out in California. You've worked for the fire service. We know that, martial arts, exercise, all these things. And we know that we being your audience, right? Because I do listen to your show. We know you also grew up on a farm in England, and your dad was a large animal vet. Mm-hmm. The hell happened in between? How did you go from rural UK, son of a large animal vet, to Hollywood stuntman?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I did the stunts, it was live shows. So it wasn't Hollywood 2, the actual vicinity, but it was Universal Studios, the theme park. Okay. So I want to clarify that. I didn't do films because you couldn't as a firefighter. You just don't have the time to do that. But origin story, when I was in secondary school, so like 11 to 16, every year you had the annual physical, the medical, and they showed me the color vision book. And it's funny because my wife's an optometrist now. I've asked her about this. At the time, they were like, if you can't see the numbers, then you're colorblind. That was it, black and white. So now looking back, it's like basically saying, if you're not 20/20, then you're Stevie Wonder. When obviously there is all these degrees in between. But at the time, it was a disqualifying factor. So in this medical that I had, they told me, right, you can't be a pilot, you can't be a firefighter. And they just listed all the things that I dreamt of becoming and just took them off the table. So for years, when I reflect back now, I just fumbled around. Because imagine not realizing that you actually know what you want as a young boy, and then someone tells you, wearing a white coat and a stethoscope, you can't do that. You're kind of lost. And I wanted to be a doctor, but I just didn't have what I learned. I didn't have the desire to be a sit behind the desk and write prescriptions doctor anyway, but I didn't have the academic smarts. I just didn't, for the math. I didn't have the determination to get past that like my wife did. I mean, she overcame so much to get where she is now. She was not a natural student at all. So life took me in this bizarre path where I was fumbling around and I was a bit of a fuck up. And, I lifeguarded, and I found myself working on summer camps in America. And that ultimately led me to travel the world with my girlfriend from there. And then when I'm traveling, I'm in Australia. Oh, and let me backtrack. So I fall in love with this girl, an English girl I met in this American summer camp. Go back to London. I'm in university. She's in Wales in this drama school, and she's doing the sets and the costumes. She's behind the scenes. And so after a year, on a whim, I'm like, well, I'm just going to try and get into drama school. And I'm an awful actor, but somehow I think I was just different. I was a martial artist, and I threw some kicks in the monologue and all that stuff. And I got in. Mind-blowing, I got in. So do this 1 year course in acting. And within that, there was a stage combat course. I was awful at acting, but very good at sword work and all that kind of thing. Then we decided to travel the world, get to Australia. Universal Studios is opening a park in Japan. And on a whim, again, this is the one takeaway from my life. If a door opens, fucking walk through it. What's the worst that can happen? You get offered something and you say, I don't want it, but thank you. So I got the job, worked in Japan doing stunts for 15 months. Met my son's mother, who's an American performer over there. And then that's what brought me to the US. And then when I've told this story on here before, about a week before we flew over. We went to England for 6 months to get my visa, and then we came over here. There was a issue of muscle and fitness, and there was a Miami-Dade firefighter in it. And we're talking, God, 25 years ago now. And I was reading about what they do here. And it wasn't just the fire, it was this paramedic thing too. And everything just came together. There was the fire, there was the doctor thing I didn't realize was supposed to be a medic. And then where we moved, it was, I don't know, 3 miles from Central Florida Fire Academy in Orlando. And so everything just came together. It was shortly after 9/11. Yeah, and so that was the beginning of this. And then having that stunt background, I then worked for Universal in Orlando. Then we moved to LA for a few years, and I worked over there in that Universal. Came back here, and I just, up until 2 years ago, did the Jason Bourne stunt show in Orlando. So that's how all these kind of fingers, intersect. But yeah, I mean, honestly, and even moving departments, like going back to exactly what you said, hey, if you're not happy or it's not the right fit or your family needs to be somewhere else and you put your family first, which I always did, then just make it happen. Walk through that door. There are thousands of fire departments across America. To your point, circling around, be where you need to be. Find that tribe. Find that place that you're happy. Because Anaheim, I always hold that on the pedestal. In California, that was my place. And I literally was talking to my captain 2 days ago. And I left there in 2008. And they were at my wedding. They're my best man and my groomsman. And you know what I mean? So yeah. But life's too short to just be stuck in a fire department for 25 years with a countdown on your app, 10 years into it. Miserable, there's so many exciting things out there to do. And then that obviously led to podcasts and books and now television shows, hopefully. So long-winded answer to your question, but that's the missing bit in between.
No, I love it. And thank you for sharing that. Right. Because again, I listen, I'm sure somebody else said the same question, like connect those two dots, rural, large animal, British farm, to stuntman and the firefighter and the like. And so that's also funny. So in the UK, they you had something less than 20/20 vision. They said nope, you can't do it. US, they just asked if you could see, probably.
Yeah.
If the answer to that's yes, it's not how many fingers are you holding up. It's am I holding up fingers? You're good to go.
Yeah, it was the chart. But what was funny is so I read this magazine and I go to this fire academy and I listen to the orientation and I'm like, I'm just going to ask him to, ask me to name a color of anything in the room. Like, this is stupid. I can see colors.
Right.
And that was all it took, was to question, the test that they do and ask, does it make sense? Does a 24-48 make sense? No, we know it doesn't because our profession is crumbling. There's so many things. Does backboarding make sense? No, it doesn't. We watch them sliding all over the place while their head's strapped to a head collar. No, it's making it work. Does using water on a car fire make sense when everything is class B? No, it doesn't as well. So there's, you take a step back and it's really good to question things. And then you say, well, then what can I do to get around that barrier if that's what I got to do? And I've got friends that are amputees that are, working in police still. Lost his leg after a car hit him on a wreck. And now he's back, with prosthesis, So yeah, so it is interesting, but yeah, sometimes you gotta, take a step back, ask, does it make sense? And then if it doesn't, then what do you need to do differently? If you want to get from A to B bad enough, you'll find a way, or you'll find someone else who's done it already that you can learn from.
Yeah. You're speaking my language now.
All right. Well, going back to you again, let's put the microphones back the way they're supposed to. The last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you, where to find the Incomologists. What do you do to decompress?
Great question. So I do a number of things. One, this may seem odd, but my morning routine is a touch point. I'm robotic about it. 4 a.m. every day. I get up, I have coffee, my first cup of coffee, I walk outside and just greet nature, right? And that may sound hippy dippy woo woo.
Not at all.
10 years ago, I'd have been making fun of myself, but I go outside and I ground, even if it's cold, even if it's just for a minute.
With bare feet?
Yep. There's something to it. If nothing else, it's a part of my routine now, so it's staying. But my morning routine, starting my day right, it helps keep my day from, you spoke to decompressing. It helps keep my day from compressing, right? Anything outdoors, Leanne and I, anything outside we're in, we fish often, we're fortunate enough. We saved up for a really long time, bought a boat. We use that often, nature walks, nature trails. If it's outside, then it's relaxing and decompressing for me, and exercise. I mean, when I miss time in the gym consistently, right? Like life gets busy. Sometimes you get pulled away from it and you just can't make time. I notice changes in myself. I get irritable. I don't sleep well. I'm not kind, at least in my head, like driving around in traffic or whatever. But yeah, so I would say those are probably the three biggest things, holding true to my morning routine, making time with Leanne outdoors, doing something, and making sure to keep myself healthy.
Love it. Well, for people listening, if they want to learn more about you, reach out to you, where are the best places online for you and or the Incomologists?
Sure. So social media is probably the quickest, easiest. I'm John East, John, last name East, like the direction. I'm on all the social medias. I'm friends with James, so you can probably just go find me in his friends list. The Incomologists, we have a presence on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. _Incomologists, INCOMOLOGISTS, which is oddly difficult to recite off memory. Also, theincomologists.com. You can find all of our contact information there, or just feel free to reach out to me direct. If you have a question about anything I talked about, it doesn't have to be related to our business. I'm always happy to chat, always happy to make new friends. So hit me up, give a like and share or whatever you're supposed to say.
Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation. We've gone all over the place from, the technical operations side all the way through to some of the, emotional highs and lows. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you for having me. Flattered.